The text arrived at 2:47 a.m., a small sound that sliced through a house too quiet to be innocent. I rolled over on the couch, the TV screen frozen on a silent weather map, and touched my phone, expecting an airport selfie or a late check-in from Grant's sales conference in Las Vegas. Instead, a grainy chapel photo steadied into view, neon script paper bouquet, 2 signatures at the bottom like a dare. The caption under it was careless and smug. He'd just married Brianna, and I was, in his words, pathetic. For a breath, I felt the floor tilt. Then something inside me clicked into a steady line, as if the room and my pulse had agreed to stop arguing. I typed back one word, set the phone down, and listened to the refrigerator hum like a witness. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if stories of quiet justice help you breathe a little easier, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. My name is Elaine Porter, and if you met me last fall, you would have called my life ordinary, in the nicest way, a well-kept brick house on a tree-lined street, a job I loved at the high school, a husband who sold software and shook hands like a politician. I grew up in a family that measured love by what you remembered. Birthdays on time, casseroles returned clean, light bulbs replaced before anyone had to ask. So I became the one who read the fine print, balanced the accounts, and labeled the winter boxes in a tidy script. Grant was a different kind of useful. He dazzled strangers at conferences, knew the good steakhouse in every airport city, and made even a Tuesday sound like a celebration when he wanted something. We were not rich, but we were steady because I watched the numbers, and he performed the confidence of partnership that looked even from far away. For a long time, I believed that was fairness. We bought the house with money I'd saved from selling my first condo after my mother passed. My name went on the deed because it was my down payment, a practical arrangement. Grant waved off with a kiss and a joke about trusting me more than a bank. I managed the cards, kept him as an authorized user on mine because his credit had bumps he preferred not to explain, and he promised he'd fix it soon, right after the next commission. His mother, Marjorie, preferred her sons married to women who said we when they meant I, and she hugged me hard when other people looked, then whispered advice about how a wife should forgive a man's stresses once the church doors have closed. His sister Kelsey borrowed my dresses and returned them with new wrinkles and a caption about family goals, then rolled her eyes when I asked for them back. None of it broke the spell. It was background noise to a life that from the curb passed for happy. Our days found their grooves. I left the house first and returned with grocery bags and notes for the PTA he called from hotel rooms and airport bars with stories big enough to fill the silence. On good nights, we walked the neighborhood and pointed at other people's porch lights, making plans for landscaping we never quite did. He asked me to cover the fee for a certification he needed to close the big accounts, and I did because I believed in investments in people rising together. When small cracks appeared, a late charge, he couldn't explain a flight, he missed a perfume in his car that didn't match anything I owned. I pressed them flat with patience. I thought I was protecting our marriage from noise. I didn't know I was muffling a siren. After the photo and the message, the house was not a sanctuary so much as a map I understood. I moved through it as if I had practiced this drill. I opened my laptop and removed his name where it didn't belong. Authorized user. No more logins, reset subscriptions I didn't recognize, suddenly blinking canceled. I called a locksmith who didn't ask for details once he heard the hour in my voice. By dawn, the deadbolt turned with a brand new click, and the garage keypad sang a code only I knew. The sun lifted its pale shoulder over the roofs across the street, and I stood at the kitchen sink with my hands flat on the counter, listening to the quiet earn its keep. I slept after that, a short, heavy sleep, and woke to pounding on the front door that rattled the picture frames as if an answer were something I owed. The pounding on my front door carried the kind of force that made the walls tremble, as if anger itself had taken on fists. I steadied my breathing, smoothed my hair, and looked through the peephole. 2 police officers stood on the porch, one older, with gray at his temples, the other younger, with a face still learning how to appear stern. My heart jumped once, but then it slowed into something, even a rhythm I could trust. I opened the door only enough to meet their eyes. "Ma'am, we got a call about a domestic dispute," the older one said. "Your husband claims you locked him out of his home." He emphasized the word husband, not realizing it no longer fit. I slid my phone from my pocket and lifted it between us. The photo from Las Vegas glowed in the morning light, neon chapel in the background, Grant holding papers beside Brianna. The younger officer stifled a laugh, his lips twitching. The older one asked quietly, "This is real." "He married her 5 hours ago," I answered. "He is not my husband anymore." The two men exchanged glances, their radios hissing with voices I didn't recognize. I could hear a woman yelling faintly through the static Marjorie's voice, high and frantic, as though the world owed her a different truth. The older officer sighed into his shoulder mic, saying it wasn't a police matter. He explained they couldn't force me to let someone back into a house when he'd just signed marriage papers with another woman. The younger officer cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. "He's saying you cut off his money and took his belongings." I kept my voice level. "This house was mine before our marriage. The deed is in my name. The cards are mine as well. He was only listed as a user. His belongings are safe. I haven't touched a thing." That was enough for them. They reminded me not to destroy his property and walked back to their cruiser, shaking their heads. When the street was quiet again, I leaned against the wall, feeling my pulse echo in the silence. The locks had turned, and so had I. By mid-afternoon, I knew what was coming next. Grant was predictable when cornered. He'd never face me alone, not when he could arrive with an audience. Sure enough, the doorbell rang, and through the blinds, I saw them. Grant stood in the driveway, his crooked smile slipping between anger and bravado. Beside him was Brianna, still in a white sundress that carried the creases of a clearance rack. Behind them, like shadows rehearsing their lines, were Marjorie and Kelsey. I pressed the garage opener before they could pound again. Inside, Grant's boxes were stacked neatly, each taped and labeled in thick marker clothes, books, electronics. He faltered, at the sight his swagger cut short, though he tried to recover. "Wow," he said with a smirk. "Didn't even wait for me to come back." "You didn't come back," I replied, my voice calm. "You got married." The words hung there, undeniable. Brianna shifted, tucking her hair behind her ear, her eyes darting at the boxes as if they carried warnings she had ignored. Marjorie stepped forward, her scowl carved deep. "This is outrageous, Elaine. A wife doesn't throw her husband's things into the garage like garbage." "I'm not his wife," I said evenly, "and nothing here is garbage. It's packed carefully. You should thank me." Kelsey snorted, her smirk sharp. "Always the control freak, Elaine. You're just bitter. He finally found someone who makes him happy." She leaned on the word happy, as though daring Brianna to defend it. But Brianna's smile flickered, her hand tightening on her purse strap. Grant puffed out his chest, trying to fill the air. "Look, I get that you're hurt, but you can't just shut me out. This house I cut in was purchased 3 years before I met you. Your name was never on the deed." His face reddened, blotches creeping up his neck. Marjorie hissed about calling the police again, but I let myself smile thinly. "Funny, that's what Grant did last night. And the police already told you it isn't your fight anymore." Rebecca whispered something to him, her hand brushing his, but he pulled away, jaw clenched. Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "You've always tried to control him. That's why he left." A laugh escaped me, sudden and startling even in my own ears. "He didn't leave me, Marjorie. He ran from responsibility. And judging by that U-Haul receipt in your hand, he's already running again." Rebecca's face turned pink as she pulled out a card for the driver. It declined. She tried another with the same result. The silence pressed in. Grant dug out his wallet, throwing his own card forward with a curse. Rebecca's eyes widened. I thought she began, but his glare silenced her. I crossed my arms and leaned on the doorframe. Looks like the Vegas glow wore off fast. The air grew heavy. Kelsey stepped closer, her smile cruel. You think you're so smart, Elaine, but you're bitter, alone, and 46. What do you even have left? Her words struck like stones, but instead of breaking me, they settled into something sharp inside. I stepped closer, my voice low. What do I have left? I have my home. I have my career. I have my freedom. And I don't have Grant, which feels like a blessing. Grant flinched. Marjorie muttered, but Rebecca's voice cracked through the silence. Grant, did you know she canceled your cards? His face darkened, panic flashing before he swallowed it. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tilting it slightly. And Brianna, your company has a no fraternization policy, doesn't it? I wonder what HR would think of this Vegas wedding. She turned sharply to Grant. You said it wouldn't matter. His barked reply was raw. Shut up. The tension thickened, everyone's breath loud in the small space of the garage. Finally, I straightened. You have 1 hour to load up and leave. After that, the locks change again, and anything left goes to the curb. Marjorie's mouth opened, but Grant had already grabbed a box, his movements jerky. Rebecca stood frozen, her eyes clouded with doubt. Kelsey sneered, but her bravado was empty now. I stepped back inside and closed the door, my hands trembling not from fear, but from adrenaline. Through the window, I watched them wrestle with the boxes, their voices cutting at each other. Rebecca argued, Marjorie snapped, Kelsey sneered, and Grant sweated under the weight of his own things. Each box they carried looked like a piece of my life being hauled away, yet with every trip, the air inside my home grew lighter. When the last box left the driveway, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the stillness. The house breathed differently now, no longer heavy with his presence. I knew Grant well enough to expect he wouldn't stop here. He never did. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever storm he planned to drag to my door next, I would be ready, because the locks had turned, and so had I. The house felt different once the last box was gone. The silence wasn't the same kind of quiet that had crushed me the night I got his message. This was lighter, though it carried edges I wasn't ready to touch. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the driveway, knowing Grant wasn't finished. He never left quietly. Desperation was his second skin, and I could feel it clinging to the edges of the day. 2 mornings later, I woke to my phone buzzing against the nightstand. Notifications rolled in one after another, so fast they blurred together. Facebook tags, private messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, even old coworkers sending questions with thinly veiled judgment. Grant had started a campaign, and he wasn't alone. His words were plastered across social media along with Marjorie's tears and Kelsey's staged photos. They painted me as the villain in careful, cruel strokes. According to them, I was a manipulative woman who trapped Grant in a loveless marriage. I supposedly controlled every dollar, every choice, until he had no choice but to escape. In one post, Marjorie clutched a tissue, eyes red, claiming her son had suffered years of abuse at my hands. In another, Kelsey posed with Grant and Brianna, declaring she was standing with family against toxicity. The comments beneath them were what cut deepest. People I had welcomed into my home wrote that they had always suspected I was controlling. A former colleague said Grant finally looked happy. The lies spread like spilled ink, soaking into places I hadn't expected. I put the phone down and pressed my palms flat against the counter. The ache wasn't just anger, it was the kind of hollow grief that comes when people you thought knew you choose to believe the opposite. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Instead, I stood in that kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum, letting the weight of betrayal settle over me like a heavy shawl. That afternoon, I called Noah Patel. He had been in our circle for years, the kind of man who could coax a broken computer back to life with a few keystrokes. When he picked up, his voice carried concern before I said a word. "Elaine, I've seen some of the things online. Are you okay?" "They're everywhere," I said, my throat tight. "He's turning people against me. I don't even know where to start." Noah didn't hesitate. "You start by fighting back. Grant's always been careless. Let me come over tonight. We'll see what he left behind." By evening, Noah was sitting at my dining table, his laptop glowing in the dim light. His fingers flew over the keys, pulling up threads from places I didn't even know could be reached. "Grant thinks he's clever," Noah muttered, "but he's sloppy. Let's see what we find." Moments later, his face lit with something sharper. "Here." Jackpot. Messages scrolled across the screen, Facebook chats between Grant and Brianna stretching back more than a year. They weren't just confessions of an affair. They were records of schemes. Brianna had written about siphoning money from our grocery account, laughing at the idea I'd ever notice. Grant bragged about saving for their dream wedding, about how easy it was to take from me. One message burned itself into my memory. "She's too boring to check. Can't wait to see her face when we're gone." I read them until the bile rose in my throat. My hands trembled not from fear, but from fury that settled in my chest like a stone. Noah leaned back watching me. "This is gold. Do you want me to package it?" "Yes," I whispered. No explanations, just proof. By midnight, the screenshots were ready. I posted them without commentary. No speeches, no pleas, just his words and hers laid bare for anyone to see. The response was immediate. The same people who had whispered doubts came back with apologies, their comments now filled with outrage at him. Friends wrote that they were ashamed they had believed the lies. Strangers mocked Brianna for marrying a man who stole grocery money. For the first time in days, I exhaled without my chest tightening. But Grant didn't stop. His father called my workplace, accusing me of harassment and stalking. My boss, a woman who had known me for years, called me into her office and played the message on speaker. His father's voice screeched through the line, but she rolled her eyes and muted it. "Don't worry," she said. "We're not buying into this nonsense. I just thought you'd want to hear how desperate they've become." The next evening, the security cameras I had installed caught Grant himself at my back door. He rattled the handle, whispering angrily into his phone that I had locked him out and his things were still inside. The porch light lit his face, twisted and frantic. I sent the footage straight to Alicia Moreno, the attorney I had contacted earlier. She assured me it would matter later. The attacks only grew stranger. Grant told people I had killed his cat, though he knew I was severely allergic and we had never owned one. Some people believed him anyway. Then he called my mother, his voice breaking, claiming Rebecca meant nothing, and he wanted to come home. I sat next to my mother on the couch as she listened, her face carved from stone. When he begged, she answered with a cold clarity I had never heard from her before. "You should have thought of that before you betrayed my daughter for 8 months." She hung up her hand, trembling only slightly as she set down the phone. I squeezed her hand, my throat burning. "Thank you," I whispered. She kissed my forehead softly. "You're stronger than he ever deserved." I thought that might be the end of it, but the strangest call came the next morning. A polite voice introduced herself as Sarah Cole, Brianna's mother. "Elaine," she said, "we all make mistakes. Young men do foolish things. He can't afford a wife right now. Could you maybe take him back just until he gets on his feet?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then the absurdity of it hit me. "You're asking me to take back the man who cheated on me so your daughter doesn't have to deal with him." Her voice sharpened. "When you put it that way, you sound selfish. Marriage is about forgiveness." I let out a short, bitter laugh. Marriage is about respect. And your daughter married a man who has none. Then I hung up. That night my phone rang again from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Grant's voice poured through ragged and venomous. You ruined my life, Elaine. I hope you're happy. I didn't hesitate. I am, I said calmly. Thanks for asking. Then I ended the call, blocked the number, and set the phone down. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was strong, steady, the kind that comes after a storm when you know the sky is clearing. Still, I could feel the weight of something else waiting just ahead, a larger fight I would soon have to face. The courthouse smelled of paper and disinfectant, the kind of scent that clings to long corridors where lives unravel beneath fluorescent lights. I arrived early, my heels clicking on the tile, the navy dress I'd chosen feeling more like armor than clothing. Alicia Moreno walked beside me, her eyes sharp and steady, the kind of presence that made me feel shielded. I wasn't nervous. Weeks of lies and chaos had burned the fear out of me. What I carried instead was anticipation, as though I already knew how this performance would end. Grant entered minutes later. He tried to step in with the swagger I once knew, but it didn't hold. His shoulders carried tension, his jaw clenched too tight. Brianna trailed behind him, smaller than I'd ever seen her, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder, her chin tucked toward the floor. Marjorie swept in next, her perfume heavy, her scowl practiced, and Kelsey glued herself to her side, eyes sharp with hostility. Grant's glance caught mine, but I looked straight through him. The judge entered, a tall man with weary eyes that spoke of too many domestic dramas dressed up as legal arguments. We rose, then sat. Grant's attorney, a man in an ill-fitting suit with slicked hair, stood first. Your Honor, he said, my client contests the validity of the Las Vegas marriage. He was under emotional duress, intoxicated, and manipulated into signing those documents. The judge raised an eyebrow. Duress and intoxication. That's a bold claim. His tone carried the weight of disbelief. Alicia stood smoothly, her file thick in her hands. Your Honor, we have 73 pages of messages, text records, and bank statements showing Mr. Porter planned this affair for over a year. He siphoned funds from my client's accounts and even boasted about it. She placed the folder firmly on the judge's desk, the sound crisp and final. He flipped through the papers, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to distaste. At one point, he paused, then read aloud. Can't wait to see her stupid face when she realizes I took her for everything. His eyes lifted to Grant. Mr. Porter, did you write this? Grant flushed crimson, fumbling for words. That's out of context. What context makes it better? The judge asked, his voice dry. Silence followed. Brianna shifted in her seat, her face pale, eyes avoiding mine. Alicia pressed forward. Your Honor, not only did Mr. Porter commit adultery, he legally married another woman while still bound by his first marriage. That is bigamy. The evidence is indisputable. Grant's lawyer tried to recover his voice, faltering. Technically, my client believed his marriage to Ms. Porter was already. Belief doesn't override the law, the judge cut, in lifting a hand. He signed marriage documents while still legally married. That is bigamy, and frankly, I am appalled I need to state this so plainly. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Kelsey muttered something under her breath, sharp enough to earn a warning look from the bailiff. Marjorie shook her head dramatically, her hand clutching at an imaginary string of pearls. The decision came swiftly. The judge granted the divorce, awarding me full ownership of the house and all financial assets. Grant was entitled only to his personal belongings and his vehicle, for which he remained responsible. On top of that, the judge ordered 6 months of modest alimony repayment for the professional certification I had funded the year before. The gavel struck, and with it a weight lifted from my chest. Grant's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked as if the ground beneath him had given way. Brianna buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling. Marjorie gasped, loudly enough to draw stares, while Kelsey's glare landed on me like she believed her fury could rewrite the ruling. But the paper in the judge's hand was final. When we stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the real spectacle began. Marjorie erupted. First, her voice pitched high and sharp. "This is theft. She stole from my son." People passing by slowed their eyes, catching the scene as though it were street theater. Sarah Cole. Brianna's mother had come too. She stood off to the side, clutching a coffee cup, muttering about young love and foolish choices. The shouting escalated. Kelsey lunged forward suddenly, her own coffee cup in hand. She flung the liquid toward me, but it missed, splattering across Sarah's blouse instead. Sarah gasped, staring down at the stain. "You idiot!" she snapped. "Watch your tone, tramp!" Marjorie shot back, her voice jagged with rage. And just like that, the two mothers fell into a shouting match. Cups and napkins, waving coffee, dripping onto the courthouse steps. Security rushed forward to pull them apart, their radios crackling with sharp commands. I stood back with Alicia, arms folded, watching the chaos unfold. "I've had quieter murder trials," she whispered, her tone wry. Notably absent from the fight was Grant. He had already slipped away, shoulders hunched, Brianna trailing behind him like a discarded shadow. Neither of them looked back. Later, I would hear the gossip. Grant, unable to sit with his humiliation, found comfort that very night in the company of a 22-year-old bartender he had met in Las Vegas. Brianna's gamble had ended before the ink on their marriage certificate was dry. That night, I returned to my kitchen. The silence was different now, not heavy or wounded, but clean. I poured a glass of wine and sat at the table, the divorce papers neatly folded beside me. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't press on my ears. It rested gently around me. I lifted the glass in a small toast, not to victory, but to release. Yet even as I savored that moment of peace, I knew the ripples from this day were only beginning. Outside the courthouse walls, reputations were already unraveling, and soon the aftershocks of their choices would spread further than any of them had expected. The weeks that followed the courthouse ruling unfolded like aftershocks from an earthquake. The legal papers had settled everything on record, but Grant was not built to accept loss quietly. He lashed out in every way he could, striking at the edges of my life as though enough noise might make me bend. The first wave came in the form of whispers. Friends called me some, cautiously, others outright indignant, saying Grant was telling anyone who would listen that I had stolen his future. He painted himself as a man betrayed by a cold wife, forced into another woman's arms by loneliness. Marjorie fed the fire, shaking her head in church circles, hinting that her poor son had been tricked into supporting me all those years. Kelsey wrote cryptic posts about cutting toxic ties that everyone knew were directed at me. Their stories carried further than I liked, and though I had the judge's ruling in my favor, the sting of doubt from people who only half knew us pressed like salt into a cut. Instead of answering with words, I turned again to Noah. He arrived one evening with his laptop, setting it down on my table with the same determination as before. "He's still sloppy," Noah said, scrolling through Grant's trail. "If he wants to play this game, we'll keep showing people the truth." He compiled timelines, matched them with receipts, and tied them to Grant's own careless words. I didn't need to explain or defend myself, just sharing those threads was enough to turn the tide. The proof spread fast. Former coworkers who had believed the lies now apologized, some privately, others publicly. The same social media that had once felt like a weapon against me now carried his downfall piece by piece. Each screenshot, each record, was another stone I placed carefully, building a wall between myself and his chaos. For the first time, I felt like I was steering the current instead of drowning in it. Grant's anger only deepened when silence no longer worked in his favor. Late one night, the motion light outside my back door flared on. The cameras caught him again, his face lit sharp against the porch light. He rattled the handle, muttering into his phone that I had stolen his life and kept his things. I sent the footage straight to Alicia. Her reply was steady. Good. Let him keep giving us evidence. Soon after, I learned that he had started calling my mother again. Not to beg this time, but to blame. He told her I had ruined him, that without me, he had no roof, no future, no place in the world. She didn't entertain it. My mother told him plainly that he had thrown away the only person who ever believed in him. Then she hung up. For all the ways she had taught me patience in my younger years that day, she showed me that boundaries were a form of strength too. The most surreal moment came when Sarah Cole appeared at my door without calling first. She held a small gift bag, as though that would soften her presence. I opened the door only halfway. She smiled thin and strained. Elaine, I know you're angry, but Grant isn't well. He can't support himself. Maybe if you took him back just until he's steady, everyone could breathe easier. Her words fell heavy between us. I studied her face, trying to decide if she truly believed what she was asking, or if she just wanted her daughter free of the mess. You're asking me to take in the man who betrayed me, so your daughter doesn't have to? Her smile faltered. Marriage is about forgiveness. You sound selfish. I let the silence stretch until her eyes wavered. Marriage is about respect, I said finally. And your daughter married a man who has none. I closed the door gently, letting the latch click in place. She didn't knock again. The pressure built in smaller, stranger ways after that. Anonymous notes slid under my door. Old acquaintances messaged me with sympathy for what I must have done to push him away. Each attempt was a reminder of how far Grant was willing to twist the story, but instead of breaking me, they sharpened my focus. I documented everything, every call, every message, every attempt to rewrite reality. In the middle of it all, Alicia reminded me to stay steady. The courtroom gave you your victory on paper, she said, but his behavior will be what destroys him in the long run. You don't need to rush this. Her calm was grounding. Each time she spoke, it reminded me that patience could be its own kind of weapon. One evening, after another round of rumors surfaced online, Noah and I sat together at the table screens glowing in the dark kitchen. He leaned back, shaking his head. You've already won, Elaine. He just doesn't know it yet. Let him keep thrashing. The more he fights, the deeper he sinks. His words sank into me like a seed taking root. I realized then that I didn't need to chase justice. It was already circling him, every move of his own making. My task was simply to remain steady, to let the truth keep breathing while he drowned in the noise he had created. That night, I slept without waking. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the closest I had felt in months. I knew the storm wasn't finished, but for the first time, I also knew it wasn't mine to weather. The cracks in his life were widening on their own, and all I had to do was stand still long enough to watch them break open. The day of the final hearing came with a sky the color of pewter clouds pressed low over the city, as though even the weather knew something heavy was about to be decided. I walked up the courthouse steps with Alicia beside me, her briefcase tucked under one arm, her stride brisk and unshaken. My own steps were deliberate, measured every click of my heels against stone, reminding me that this was no longer a battle of words whispered in living rooms or accusations tossed across social media. This was the stage where truth would stand on record. Inside, the air was cool and humming with fluorescent lights. I sat at our table, folding my hands together to keep them still. When the doors at the back opened, Grant entered first. His suit hung awkwardly as though it had been chosen in a hurry. Behind him, Brianna walked with her eyes fixed on the floor, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder, her face pale beneath too much makeup. Marjorie swept in next, her perfume sharp enough to sting the nose, her expression rehearsed into righteous indignation. Kelsey trailed her mother lips tight in a smirk that didn't quite hide the tension in her jaw. Grant tried to meet my eyes as he slid into his seat, but I looked straight through him. The judge entered tall and weary-eyed, his robe whispering as he took his chair. We all rose, then sat in unison. Grant's lawyer stood first, a man in a cheap suit with slicked back hair that looked better suited for sales than law. Your Honor, he began, my client contests the validity of the so-called Las Vegas marriage. He was under duress, intoxicated, manipulated into signing those papers. The judge arched one eyebrow, unimpressed. Duress and intoxication. That's quite a claim. Alicia rose, then calm and exacting. She placed a thick folder on the bench with a sound that cracked like punctuation. Your Honor, what we have are 73 pages of messages, financial records, and admissions in his own words. Mr. Porter not only carried on an affair for more than a year, he stole from my client to fund it. The judge opened the folder, flipping pages slowly. At one point, he stopped reading aloud, a line that silenced the room. Can't wait to see her face when she realizes I took her for everything. His eyes lifted to Grant. Mr. Porter, did you write this? Grant's face burned crimson. That's out of context, he stammered. The judge leaned back. Tell me what context makes it better. Silence followed. Brianna shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip. Alicia pressed forward, her voice clear. Your Honor, this was not just adultery, it was bigamy. Mr. Porter legally married another woman while still married to my client. The law is explicit. There is no dispute here. Grant's attorney tried once more, his tone faltering. My client believed the marriage to Miss Porter had already ended. Belief does not override law. The judge interrupted, his hand raised firmly. He signed a marriage certificate while still bound to another. That is bigamy, and frankly, I am appalled to hear it argued otherwise. Murmurs rose around us. Kelsey muttered something sharp enough for the bailiff to snap his attention her way. Marjorie clutched at her pearls with theatrical gasps. Brianna's face sank into her hands, her shoulders trembling. When the ruling came, it was swift and clear. The divorce was granted. I retained full ownership of the home and all financial assets. Grant was left with only his personal belongings and his vehicle still under his responsibility. On top of that, the judge ordered 6 months of alimony for the professional certification I had funded on his behalf. The gavel struck final and echoing. I didn't smile, not outwardly. Relief came quietly, loosening something I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Grant, however, looked gutted, his mouth opening and closing without words. Marjorie gasped again, louder this time, while Kelsey glared at me as though her hatred could undo legal ink. Brianna leaned back in her chair, her eyes hollow, the fight already drained from her. Outside, the courthouse steps turned into a stage of their own. Marjorie exploded first, her voice rising above the noise of traffic. This is theft! She stole from my son! Her shrill tone drew the eyes of strangers passing by. Sarah Cole, Sarah Cole. Brianna's mother stood nearby, clutching a paper coffee cup. She muttered about foolish young choices, her voice brittle. Kelsey lunged, suddenly flinging her own cup toward me. It missed, splattering hot liquid across Sarah's blouse. Sarah gasped, looking down at the stain. You idiot, she snapped. Watch your mouth, tramp! Marjorie shot back, her voice cracking with fury. Within seconds, the two mothers were shouting cups, waving napkins, flying, the argument dissolving into a farce that had security guards rushing forward. I stood to the side with Alicia, arms folded, the scene unfolding like a poorly written play. I've had calmer jury deliberations, she whispered dryly. Through it all, Grant slipped away unnoticed, shoulders hunched, Brianna trailing behind him like a shadow. Neither of them looked back. Later, I would hear he had wasted no time finding comfort with a bartender, young enough to be his daughter, leaving Brianna abandoned before the ink on their certificate had time to dry. That night, back in my kitchen, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean open, as though the walls themselves had been waiting for this moment. I poured myself a glass of wine and set the decree on the table. The paper didn't feel like an ending. It felt like release. I lifted the glass in a quiet toast, not to victory, but to freedom. The courthouse had closed one chapter, but I knew the aftershocks were still spreading. Reputations were already cracking, and soon the unraveling would stretch beyond courtrooms and stairwells into every circle Grant had once tried to charm. The weeks after the decree moved quickly, as though life itself had been waiting for me to take one step forward before opening new doors. I listed the house, half expecting it to linger on the market. Instead, offers poured in. Within a month, the papers were signed, the keys passed across a table, and I walked away with more profit than I had dared to hope for. With that, I let go of the rooms where echoes of arguments still clung to the corners. I bought a condo downtown, smaller but full of glass and light. At night, the city glowed beneath my windows, the streets alive with energy that felt like renewal. The silence inside was different now, lighter, no longer pressed with dread. Each evening, I came home to space that was fully mine walls, untainted by his shadow. The gossip, though, reached me without effort. Marjorie couldn't resist, phoning my mother, her voice dripping with bitterness as she painted herself the victim of an ungrateful daughter-in-law. Kelsey posted vague messages about betrayal, careful not to mention names, though everyone knew. And then came the news about Brianna. She had stormed out after discovering Grant with a 22-year-old bartender, a woman he had met the very night of their Vegas wedding. The irony was almost too sharp to savor. Brianna's public posts about deception and regret left no doubt she was finished with him. Grant's professional world unraveled just as quickly. Word spread that his company had enforced its strict fraternization policy. Both he and Brianna were dismissed, their impulsive marriage now stamped with unemployment papers. Without income, without a partner to shield him, he drifted back into Marjorie's house. His reputation frayed beyond repair. Former friends distanced themselves. Old colleagues stopped answering his calls. The fallout spread further. Marjorie's sharp tongue, once wielded in her own circles, began to cut her too. She was banned from her favorite coffee shop after berating a barista who reminded her of me. Kelsey, restless for attention, wrote bitter notes about toxic relatives, turning her anger inward on her own family. Even Sarah Cole tried filing a claim for damages against Grant, accusing him of ruining her daughter's life. The case dissolved quickly, but the spectacle left deep cracks in the image she had worked to protect. I didn't need to involve myself. Their chaos carried itself forward without my hand. Instead, I turned toward myself. The gym I had once visited, only out of duty, became a place where I reclaimed strength, piece by piece. The rhythm of weights, the steady thrum of treadmills gave me back a body I trusted. It was there in the calm after a morning class that I first spoke to Jacob. He wasn't loud or flashy. He was steady kind, the sort of man who didn't fill silence with noise, but with presence. He knew pieces of my story because gossip has a way of traveling, but he never asked for details. One morning after a workout, he handed me a coffee with my name scribbled on the cup. Only it wasn't my name, it read, not Grant. I laughed so hard the warmth splashed over my fingers. Jacob smiled, eyes gentle. Thought you could use the reminder. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt laughter without weight. Around that same time, Alicia called me back to her office for one last matter. She slid a frame across the desk, inside it a copy of the Vegas marriage certificate. "Thought you might want a keepsake," she said with the faintest smirk. I carried it home and hung it on the wall of my condo, not as a wound, but as a marker of survival. It stood as proof that betrayal could be endured, that dignity could be rebuilt stronger than before. The months rolled forward with a gentler rhythm. I found myself enjoying small things again, walking through farmers markets, sitting on the balcony with a book, listening to the city hum below. Every now and then, whispers of Grant's downfall reached me, pieces carried on the wind of old acquaintances. One afternoon in a bookstore, I ran into a woman I hadn't seen in years. She leaned closer, her voice lowered. "Have you heard Marjorie called Brianna a gold-digging succubus at her book club?" The words startled a laugh out of me right there between the aisles, so loud heads turned. I didn't care. The same voices that had once defended him were now dismantling his image themselves, word by word. There was a kind of justice in that I hadn't expected, sharp but oddly satisfying. At night, I sometimes thought back to the message that began it all, the cruel text he sent beneath neon lights in the middle of the night. Those words had been written to break me. Now they carried no sting. They were nothing but a reminder that people like him craft their own ruin. All I had to do was step aside and let gravity take them down. Still as complete as the collapse felt, I knew the story wasn't fully finished. There was one last thread to tie, a quiet moment of closure waiting to be found. I didn't know yet how it would come, but I felt its weight nearby, like the final note of a song waiting to be played. When the noise of their collapse finally settled, I found myself living in a kind of quiet I had never known before. Not the silence that comes from fear or shock, but one that carried peace, the sort that wraps around you at the end of a storm. The condo felt alive each evening when I unlocked the door, city lights spilling across the walls, like a reminder that life keeps moving, no matter who tries to drag you backward. Grant's name stopped circling my days. His downfall played out on its own stage, friends drifting away, his career gone. Brianna long vanished from his side. Even Marjorie's voice grew faint, her once sharp defenses turned against her as neighbors whispered about the mess her son had made. I didn't have to raise a hand anymore. Their own words had become the stones that weighed them down. What mattered was what remained. My home was mine, chosen, and paid for on my terms. My work carried on steady and meaningful, no longer overshadowed by the chaos of someone else's ambitions. And slowly laughter returned, first in small breaths of humor with Jacob, then in the easy rhythm of days no longer watched for betrayal. It felt almost like relearning how to breathe. Sometimes I would glance at the framed copy of their Vegas marriage certificate hanging on my wall. At first it felt strange, even indulgent, but over time I came to see it differently. It wasn't a wound, it was proof. Proof that survival is possible when dignity is chosen over despair, when silence is replaced with action, and when truth is given room to stand. Looking back, I realized the lesson wasn't about punishing Grant or silencing his family. It was about reclaiming myself from the shadows they tried to paint me into. Justice came not through shouting or begging, but by holding steady, refusing to break when the storm pressed hardest. In the end, he had written his own ending. I had only chosen not to follow. Life has a way of showing us that people reveal who they are in time. Some build their worth with patience and respect. Others gamble it away with lies and shortcuts, only to find themselves empty-handed. All we can do is decide where we stand when the truth comes to light. Now, when I sit on the balcony at night, a glass of wine in hand, and the hum of the city below, I feel something I never thought I would again. Lightness. freedom, even gratitude, not for what he did, but for what it taught me. That even betrayal can be survived, and that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well once the storm has passed. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke to you the most. Share your thoughts if you'd like, and may these stories remind us all that dignity and strength can always be reclaimed.